Is that recording? Yeah, okay. Wasn't looking. Hey guys, what's up? How's 2020? Is it good? Are you having fun yet? Yeah, it's been a pretty bad year. I think I can count on one hand like all the good things that have happened this year, and yeah, it's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. I think we can agree that one of those things we weren't expecting was, of all things, for Stephenie Meyers to just pop out of nowhere and entertain us all. And yeah, that's what I'm talking about today. Anyways, yeah. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, is the book. The book everyone's been talking about. Apparently, I don't know, I've been thinking about watching reviews, but I wanted to read through it without anyone telling me what to think. It's been a long time since I admitted that I was a fan of Twilight. And I think a lot of girls are in my same position around my age. Like, we don't want to admit that. When we were preteens, we had a thing for sparkly boys. But it's been cathartic almost to just admit to myself that, I'm into sparkly boys, and that's okay. It's okay, girlfriend. But I've also found out while reading this that I'm not into sparkly boys anymore. Yeah, so anyways, let's dish. So, before I begin this review, I want to give a couple disclaimers. First disclaimer, there will be spoilers, tons of spoilers. I'm gonna be going into this thinking you know what I'm talking about, and if you don't, well, that's on you, mate. Free country here in America. At least that's what they tell me. Anyways, the second thing is for all those people that are looking here for some rants, some dish, I'll save you the time and the trouble by answering your two questions. The first one being, did I like the book? And the second one being, should I purchase the book? And to the first question, I'd say, yes, I liked the book. Okay? Let's just get that out of the way right now. I'll disable comments so you won't be able to tell me otherwise. And the second question, should you get the book? I would say no. And let me explain. I wasn't expecting this book to be like 600 something pages. I don't remember Twilight being a small book to read either. It's been a while since I've read it, but sorry, I'm just trying to get comfortable. But I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that it was fun to get this in the mail. It's like, holy Toledo, that's a lot. So I would suggest, if you want to read this book, which I think you should, but if you want to read it, I think you should get it like in a Kindle version or something, just something easier to hold, because this was really heavy. It was heavy to hold, and that's the first problem I had with this book. Everything else is fine. It's rainbows and sunshine, the whole book. Okay, now that that's out of the way, you can leave. You can click off the video, watch someone else's hate video, because we're not doing that here. Sorry. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. And for the rest of you that are staying, thanks for staying. Pull up a seat, grab a chair, pull up an armchair, go to your local Walmart and get a chair, and have fun, because we're gonna get a little conspiracy theory here. We're gonna start reaching a bit near the end, but I think that's fine. I think it's fine to reach. I think it's superfluous to reach. And at any time when I personally feel like this video is gonna be boring, I will jump cut to me drawing a portrait of Edward, because I want to pretend that I'm still in our channel. And yeah, like, I want to draw him after reading this book, if that's any indication as to what happens in this book, and why I like it. So, yeah, alright, let's begin. Now, I want to talk about this book in what I like to call the Jenny Nicholson format. If you don't know who Jenny is, you're not really on YouTube. She's hilarious, and she did this thing in like one video. I forgot what it was about. She talks about a lot of stuff, and they're pretty long. I wanted to talk about this book in that format that I like to call the Jenny Nicholson format, because what she did in that video is she mentioned how usually reviewers talk about all the pros and then all the cons, and all anybody remembers is all the cons because you're talking about it for the last 10 minutes of your video. So she started doing this thing where she put like a pro and a con together, and I thought it was very cool and sweet, so I'm gonna attempt to do that today, although a lot of this will be rambling because I was too lazy to actually write out a script because I didn't want to come off as rote. So I'm just gonna come off as rambly, and we're gonna go with it. It's gonna be a fantastic time. Go to our list of pros and cons. I didn't write any of this down, my pros and cons. So a lot of the pros and cons, I'm gonna be honest, are gonna sound the same, and you're just gonna have to like it. You know, it'll be like going to the dentist. You love going to the dentist. Alright, so let me start off with okay, so with that in mind, let's talk about our pros and cons, you know, kind of like our little pairings, almost, like our marriages. Let's look at these marriages and see how they work and they don't work, because, like I said, a lot of these are the same, and yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you about that. Awesome, great, let's jump right into it, shall we? Ah! First con, Edward's a stalker. I mean, okay, we all knew this. This was something we understood when we read Twilight, when everyone was bashing Twilight. This was one of the major defenses against, as to why to hate Twilight, was because Edward is a stalker. And, I don't know if it was my age, like I was like 13, 12 when I read Twilight, or if it was because of the way it was described, but I always didn't care about that. You know, I didn't care. Like, I would either forget that was a thing, so when people brought it up, I was like, that's a thing? Or I'd just be like, oh, he just watched her sleep like once or twice before they met. And like, he's a vampire. It makes sense because he's not like other boys, you know? Oh, he's a stalker, and it's not just more than a few nights. Like, I feel like when I was reading it in Twilight, maybe it didn't come off as weird or creepy to me because of Belle's reaction to it. And I think this is something that a lot of movies, like, and books do in terms of, like, making stalking and obsession, like, a romantic thing. I say it wasn't just 2 nights he's watching her sleep. Like, more than half of these 600 pages is him, like, following her through the minds of others. Like, you would think, reading from the perspective of a vampire that can read minds, that would be super cool. But then you forget that this vampire is a teenage boy, and he's obsessed with a teenage girl. So it's not so cool anymore. It gets so uncomfortable at parts, and I can't tell whether or not the book wants me to feel uncomfortable about those parts, you know, because, like, I'm sure a lot of people are gonna be going into this and being like, oh my gosh, this book condones stalking, but, like, no. Edward acknowledges it's creepy, because every time it happens, he says, wow, this is really creepy. I should probably not do this. You know? And it gets really uncomfortable at parts. And it's kind of like does the thing that, like, Stranger Things did. Because in Stranger Things, the TV show, bear with me for a second, right? Like, that show, like, everyone loves that show, and everyone loves the couples in that show. They think they're super cute, adorable, whatever. But, like, half of those relationships started with like some form of stalking, or like contained some kind of stalking in some form or another, like Jonathan and Nancy, and like Lucas and Max, and like the show acknowledges that it's creepy, but it's like kind of brushed to the side because they still end up with the girl anyways. I mean, not that she's like a prize, but like it's weird that these girls know that they're actively being stalked, and they're like, oh yeah, that's cool. You're kind of cute. You know? And it's and Twilight kind of does the same thing, where like Edward's like, this is really bad and terrible and I'm a terrible person. I mean, he's always saying that he's a terrible person, but when he's stalking, he's like, wow, I'm being a really creepy person, you know? And he keeps saying the words like, I'm not a peeping Tom, I'm watching her for other reasons. It's like, okay, sure. And yeah, I don't know whether or not the book wants me to feel super creepy about this, because in the same breath of it being like, this is a really bad thing that I'm doing, he's also like, but I'm still doing it. You know what I mean? This is a common tool that comes up in romance narratives in literature and movies, because at the end of the day, a lot of creators, you know, they want to tell a love story, but they want to pad it out as long as possible, because the majority of love stories, it's the will they, won't they kind of thing, and like the end of the story is they do, you know, it's the kiss at the airport with like the pop music and the camera is spinning and you're like, oh my gosh, ugh. And so they use stalking as a form to like create a sense of they're getting to know each other, but they're not that close yet, because if they were, they would automatically get together. And that's the feeling I get from Edward's stalking of Bella. I think it was the tool that she used back in Twilight back in 2008. And I can't decide whether or not it was more accepted then, but it's super not accepted today. Like, this is 2020, we are a woke generation. So the idea of stalking someone to create this kind of pseudo bond that's not actually there, so that you can have time later to create it and feel like, you know, your book is a story, because it's long. It's an outdated tool, and so to provide some kind of like, you're gonna be okay with this, reader, because I'm going to put in that the character doesn't feel good about doing this. It's pretty cheap Stephenie Meyers. Like, I don't want to bash her because I do like her. I like her writing. I'm going to admit it. I have another one. I read The Host. I've been thinking about reading The Chemist. I haven't decided yet, but I think I will after reading this. I remembered what I love so much about her writing. So yeah, but yeah, I love her writing, I love her characters, and I love the concept she comes up with, but like, stalking is really, really bad. So yeah, that's the first con, is Edward's a stalker. It even gets so bad at some points, like, I remember the moment when I was like, okay, I'm not gonna sit through this anymore, you know, because I was putting up with it for like 13-year-old Ape, who was like, I love Twilight, I love vampires, and like, I was trying to put it up with it for her. But she's dead, you know? I have matured, and this isn't very acceptable to me anymore. And the moment that it really just turned me off and I was like, okay, I'm skipping from this point on, is when like Bella's like shifting in her bed. I don't know what reason, but her dad Charlie comes in to like check up on her, and Edward, I kid you not, the line, it's so gross. He's like, oh, I slinked back into the shadowy corner so he wouldn't see me. I was like, holy cow. Like, all I could think was, look at this through Charlie's perspective. Like, you're just going in to check in on your daughter because she's like maybe fidgeting a little in bed. You're just concerned. You just want to be like, oh, my sweet baby, okay, she's asleep. And there's a guy in the corner staring at her, and he wants to eat her. Like, actually eat. Like, that is terrifying. That's like horror movie levels of just like, what is going on? Like, honestly, I think that's the point, which is something I will get to later. First, I have to talk about my first pro, which has a lot in common with my con. So you know how I was just ranting for like the last however so minutes about how stalkerish like Edward is, and how creepy it is, and even if he's self-aware of it, and even in the book is being like, yeah, this isn't super cool, it's still happening, and it still gets rewarded. Like, he doesn't get chewed out for listening in on Bella. I skipped a heavy portion of the stalking, so I wouldn't really know for sure, but as far as I know, it doesn't go punished. But no, my first prawn, I almost said prawn, you know, like con prawn. Oh my gosh, I could call them prawns. My con pros, they could be prawns. So my first pro and my first prawn, tongue twister, is the exact same point, and that is Edward is a stalker. Now, this is getting confusing, I'm sure, but just hear me out. Okay, so in Twilight, another big reason why people said that Twilight sucked was because the vampires sparkle and they're super wussy and they don't even drink real blood. They're sucking animals, and he's all like, ugh, flowering, saying that the lion fell in love with the lamb, and it's super cringy. And yeah, that line is super cringy when it comes up in this book. Like when I was a kid, I was like, oh, how sweet! But I read it this time, and yeah, it sucks. It's really bad. But no, the pro of Edward being a stalker is the vampire side of it. So if you haven't heard already, if you've already been watching tons of reviews of this book, the big first scene that really makes an impact in this book is when Edward first smells Bella. When she's walking in and the vent, you know, blowing the heater, it's like whoosh, and she's like whoosh, and he's like it makes sense in Twilight that Bella doesn't understand what's going on because she's not inside his head. He doesn't know. He doesn't know. She doesn't know what's going on. And you don't know what's going on. So in the movie, it's kind of played off like his acting. He's like, he just, you know, Bella just let one rip and it stinks to high heaven and he just can't wait to get the Febreze. Such is not the case in this book. I'm just gonna put this here because I keep fiddling with it. Yeah, the first big scene in Midnight Sun is when he first smells her, and it's so good. It's good writing, it's good tension, it's just amazing and it's incredible. And I think the reason why I thought it was so amazing and incredible is like I understood going into the book that it would be from a vampire's perspective, so it wouldn't be as rainbows and sunshine as Twilight was, but I was also expecting it to be Twilight because that's what it's marketed as. At least that's the marketing I think everyone thought it was. But no, it's no Picnic in the Garden. And it was a real shock. I'm sorry. It was a real shock when that scene came up, and all of a sudden, you know, Edward goes from one minute being like, oh, she's got to sit next to me, poor girl, people are afraid of vampires because we're vampires, to all of a sudden being like, how do I kill her? Like, it's just pages and pages of Edward being like, how best to kill this girl without witnesses or with the least amount of casualties as possible. Like, he starts out thinking, okay, I'll kill her, everyone will scream, and then I'll have to quickly kill everyone else so that in this room so that nobody knows. And he's like, wait, but then I won't be able to enjoy her blood. So he's like, okay, then I'll kill everyone else first and then kill her. And she'll be freaking out, but you know, whatever. And he's like, but what if someone hears her scream? He's like, okay, maybe instead of killing her right here and now, I could follow her home and kill her in her home when she's alone. Yes. And then he was like, wait a second, her dad is the police chief. Do I have to kill the police chief? Like, it gets crazy. And you're sitting there and you're being like, oh my gosh, he's a psychopath. This Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde moment with this, where he's like, the monster kept telling me to do it. And I was like, I'm not gonna do it. And like, I know what you're thinking, like, oh, but he decides not to because he's in love with her. Blah, blah. But no, actually, it turns out that a lot of the reasons why Edward is the kind of vampire is because of Carlisle. And it turns out it's that way for all the siblings. Like, you would think the Cullens were the most boring vampires on planet Earth, but the way that they talk about the people around them before they, like, get to know Bella, it makes sense in a very twisted way. Because, you know, you're a human, you look at, like, a carrot in the ground, or you look at a cow across the road, and you think, yeah, that's my food, and I'm better than that because I eat it all the time. I can outsmart it, I can breed it to taste better for me, like, of course I'm better than that. That's just a natural reaction. So seeing that from the point of view of a vampire who's talking about humans that way, like, mostly Emmett and Jasper and, like, Rosalie are just like, puny humans. It's not, like, over the top done. It's, like, casually, like, it's kind of, like, casually racist. That's the word I can use. Because, like, in the very first scene, Jasper's struggling, and they're, like, putting him to the test because he's hungry, and it's really stupid, and Edward even says it's stupid. I'm like, I agree with you, my boy. But it's so funny, because, like, there's a girl sitting across from them in the cafeteria or whatever, like, behind Jasper's back, and he is sniffing her. He is sniffing, and he's licking his lips, and he's starting to think of all the ways he can hunt her down. You know, and Edward, you know, is reading his mind, so he can tell everything that everyone is thinking. And so he's just like, Jasper, dude, chill out, you know, you're tempting me. And then Alice is like, oh, Jasper, calm down. Just think that they're people, you know? Try to get to know her. Like, this is her family. You know, it's crazy. It's kind of like the opposite of when you live on the farm and your parents are telling you not to name the pig because you'll get attached and then you won't be able to eat it later. It's the exact opposite conversation, but the conversation is happening about humans and vampires. And as someone who loves, like, supernatural, paranormal stuff, this kind of stuff, I eat it up because it's so, like, casually horrific, and, like, this, it's so subtle. That's the thing. It's like Edward being, like, a vampire is so subtle. I'm, like, losing my mind thinking about this. In that regard, with Edward, like, that scene is incredible. I love that scene when Edward's gonna eat her up, and then he decides not to. Not because he finds Bella interesting, although that's a bit of it, but mostly because Carlisle would be disappointed in him. Like, he's not being nice to humans because he feels for humans or he respects humans. He's being nice to humans out of respect for his adopted father, a vampire. So, yeah, the argument that these aren't real vampires, they need to read this book, because if they like real vampires, this is where it's at, huns. This is where it's at. But just also a disclaimer, and this is the next con. Edward is a teenage boy. So, like, after that first scene, when he quickly starts liking her, it becomes apparent what I was really afraid that Edward was gonna try really hard to make me fall for Bella, you know, really like her as a person. I never really liked her as a person because I don't like characters that I can relate to in the worst kind of ways. Like, I like characters with flaws, but I don't like it when I share those flaws. Because, you know, it's kind of like being like, wow, April, you're this person too. That kind of sucks. You know? Because Bella spends a lot of her time being like, I'm not pretty, I'm gross and terrible, and I'm not anywhere near as good as him or anything like that, blah yada yada. Like, she's constantly obsessing over that stuff because she's a teenage girl, and it's terribly relatable in the worst kind of ways, and she's super brain dead, and I hate her. What was I saying? Yeah, so when you read Twilight, the question comes up often where Bella's like, I don't understand why someone like Edward would like me. And as the reader, you gotta be like, yeah, I don't understand either. It doesn't make sense. And in Midnight Sun, it's really pathetic how it happens. And, like, you'd think that in a romance story, the moment of, I love her, wouldn't it be so cringy and so, like, really, you know, kind of thing. And it gets, his obsession with her gets a little bit ridiculous, and you start to get the sense that Edward is a character that was really created to love Bella, and that is something he mentions a lot throughout the series, and I always thought that was just, like, weird romance stuff when I was reading it the first time, just being like, oh yeah, you know, people always say, like, oh, I was made for you and you were made for me, and, like, that makes no sense. But reading this book, I really started, like, I was like, oh yeah, no, he actually was created to love her. Like, you would think from reading Twilight, the moments when Bella is alone, not around Edward, just chilling with Charlie or whoever else she's chilling with. Like, Edward's off doing his own thing. He's living his own life. He's got his own plans. But that's not the case. He's, like I said, he's a stalker. So, like, there's even an inconsequential scene where she's just, like, chilling, reading a book under a tree. And it's so inconsequential, I don't even remember it from Twilight. I don't remember it at all. And so when it came up in this book, I was like, what? And he was watching her the whole time. And he was just, like, obsessed with how she was acting and trying to figure out what she was thinking because he can't read her mind. And it was like, this is... Not only is this weird, but this is boring. I was like, I don't care. I don't care. We get to learn more about Bella as a character, like her likes and her dislikes, what she's interested in, yada yada yada. Like, we get names to, like, the traits she is into, and it's like, I'm not reading this book for her. I didn't read the original series for her. I don't start liking her, like, as a person until, like, the last book. Breaking Dawn. That's I think that's accurate for me. Yeah. Yeah, like, there's a reason New Moon is everyone's least favorite book in the series, and it's not because Jacob introduces a love triangle. It's because Edward's not there, and we realize how much Bella sucks without him. We spend way too much time with her and not enough time with the vampires, and it's sad. So yeah, that's my second con, is too much Bella. But, like, it's a story about a vampire who's obsessed with a girl, so what are you gonna do? Okay, my second pro of the book, though, is just like we learn more about with Bella, we also learn 10 times more about the Cullen family, about all the other characters and their thoughts. We spend a lot more time with the Cullens, and, like, I always said after finishing the series and everyone's like, we want more Twilight. You know, me personally, what I wanted was, like, a Carlisle book, like, just to learn about his history. Because, like I said earlier in the video, you know, the Cullens live the way they live, not because they care for humans, but because they care for Carlisle, who started this whole thing out. He's the one that really cares for humans, and he's the doctor. He has lived a long time, and he has not touched human blood once. And I think he's, like, one of the first of his kind to do so. So yeah, I'm interested in learning about him as a character. And it goes into more depth about his past and his history in this book, but I just want a book titled The Origins of Carlisle, you know? Where we just start with his birth to his death. Like, he's just such an interesting character, and it's so interesting to see the juxtaposition between him and the other vampires. Like, Edward talks about his time with Volturi, how they really liked each other, how they really jived with each other, except for the fact that they couldn't agree on diets. And so, you know, Carlisle left, but he was with them for quite a while, and I want that book, you know, I want that scene of, like, so yeah, that's my pro, is that I get a little bit more of the stuff I want, which is the lore behind the vampires. That is my Jimmy Jam. You also find out where Alice came from, which I can't remember if it was in the original books, but I do remember someone telling me where Alice came from. It's a pro, is we get more character development for everyone. So yeah, second con is we develop Bella as a character, and second pro is we develop everyone else as a character. You can see why these are in prawns, you know, they really are connected to each other, they're really related. My final con of this book, I kind of touched on it lightly in my second con, is that it feels like Edward's character was created to love Bella. And that is something that, for me personally, I have started to distance myself from in terms of what I consume and read, because as a kid and as a teenager, I was constantly reading these books about, like, these perfect men falling in love with these headstrong women, and, like, they're, like, you know, it's about girl power and the boys that love them along the way, like, you know, like, like, you know, like, I would just consume these kind of books where these male characters really were created to be kind of an escapist fantasy. They're not real people. And that's where this con comes in, is Edward's, a lot of his character and a lot of decisions he makes is because of his obsession with Bella. Like, if I had to describe it in the clearest sense of a way, in the diagram of loving relationships, and like on one side is, you know, love and the other side is obsession, you know, it feels like literature is always bouncing back and forth. So let's just draw a line in the sand. We'll stay on this side with, you know, loving relationships. Let's have like, oh, I'm trying to think of like a good relationship, like a healthy one. It's very rare in literature. I'm gonna say Sokka, because Avatar: The Last Airbender is on everyone's minds, because, you know, 2020. That was one of the good things about 2020, is everyone everyone fell in love with Avatar again. Woohoo! Yay for 2020. You did it, buddy. One good thing. Awesome. Anyway, so like Sokka with his girlfriend, you know, he's chill, he loves Suki, he looks out for her, they talk things out, they're super healthy, and you know, he's just waiting in his man cave for her, and he's chill. You know, Sokka is in the love category. Here's the line. And on the other side is that character, that guy from the Netflix TV show You know, the guy who stalks the girl that he likes and then kidnaps her boyfriend and starves him to death and then eventually ends up killing it. Like, that's that side. Edward really teeters on this line. He really goes back and forth, cause and he's not like on one side more than the other. He's really just he is drunk, okay? The police officer is saying walk in a straight line, you know, heel to toe, and he is a teetering. Like, there's so many scenes of him, you know, stalking Bella through the eyes of Mike Newton. That's one of the love interests, and he's always like, oh, the way he's thinking about her, it makes me want to kill him. And I'm like, whoa. Like, I love my psychotic vampires, but whoa. You know? It's just, it's crazy to read about, and it's a very, like, it's a you moment every time that comes up. And then on the other side, he's always being like, oh, the second she wants me gone, the second that she says she gets too scared, the second, you know, and he's always asking for her permission, he's super careful and worried, and he's like, consent, you know, he's like, I just want to make sure that everything's fine. Like, I honestly, they always say don't blame the victim, but I don't think Bella's the victim. She just doesn't understand what she's doing when she asks for all the trouble to come her way. She's like, don't leave me, Edward. It gets crazy at the end. Edward really teeters on that line, and it can get scary sometimes. And that bleeds into my pro of this book, is that it bleeds into that line. Like, I feel like this is where I start getting a little conspiracy theory with this series. Because, you know, I've been waiting for this book for 15 years, and everyone says, you know, it was just a standard set of circumstances why we waited so long for this book. But I feel like now was the perfect time for this book to come out, and that's gonna sound insane, but hear me out. So when I was 12 reading Twilight, I thought to myself, Edward is the perfect man and I want to marry him. I even remember running across an article about a guy who was really annoyed that his wife was obsessed with the Twilight series, but then he started reading it and he realized, oh, this is what women look for in a mate. So the article was about how all men should read Twilight to understand why they would want a boyfriend like this. What we all didn't know then was that we were looking through the story through the eyes of an unreliable narrator, and that is where I have to give more credit than Stephenie Meyers probably deserves, because she probably didn't think about this, and if she did, kudos to you, man. What a mastermind. But like, we were all in it together with Bella. Like, we were all under Edward's, well, not all of us, but a vast majority of us were with Bella. Like, we were like, yeah, Edward's the best. He's hot. He has manners. He watches us sleep, but that's okay, because he's hot. He sparkles in the sunlight. He's like a shiny new toy, and we love him. And it reads like a romance, you know? But throughout the whole book, Edward's being like, stay away from me. Stay away from me. I'm going to kill you. Stay away from me. And that's something that you're just like, and you're reading, you're like, whatever. And Bella pushing to become a vampire in the original series, it makes sense. You're like, yeah, of course you would want to be a vampire. Why wouldn't you want to live forever with someone you love? Having all the powers in the world, like, that sounds chill. And you don't actually have to kill humans to do it. You can just eat animals. Like, what's the problem? But that's why this is where the conspiracy theory comes out. Because I think from that point, 15 years later to now, reading this book as an adult, I realized that Twilight is a tragedy. Even if it wasn't intended. And this is why I say this is very conspiracy theory. I feel like I almost want to say it's on purpose. That, you know, we get that perspective from Bella and it romanticizes the idea of vampires. And all those years being like, yeah, that's how it is, you know, Twilight ruins vampires. And then getting this book as an adult woman and realizing the idea of being married to a perpetual 17-year-old does not sound flattering anymore. Like I said, sparkly boys aren't my thing anymore. But like, and Edward has a lot of depressed, like, almost self-harmish, like, this guy has a lot of issues, with, like, depression and self-harm and stuff like that. Not like self-harm as in he's actually trying to physically hurt himself, but I mean, he emotionally, he guilt trips himself a lot. Like, personally, I'd say this book could almost be considered triggering with some of the ways he talks to himself. But, and I'd say that because I feel like that's the point. I feel like this book is almost a commentary. Like Stephenie Meyers is providing commentary on her previous mindset with Twilight. I don't know, it's so weird. Like, I'm reading it and I'm feeling like this is actually a bad thing, and it leaves a bad taste in my mouth at the end of the book when Bella's lying on the hospital bed and Edward's like, oh, your mom wants you to move to Florida? You should do that. And she's like, nah, if I moved to Florida, you'd have to stay inside all the time, like a real vampire. And it's one of those moments where it's like, this is us. It's almost like a 4D, you know, 4-dimensional, like, level achievement. Like, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it feels like, you know, it feels like hindsight, you know, you're looking back on yourself. Like, I remember reading Twilight and being like, oh, in love with a vampire, so hot. But, like, reading this book, I realized that is the suckiest place to be, pun intended. Earlier I said, you know, how this book gets more into character development. It also goes into character development for James as a character. And like James, when he is written, like the bad guy, James, he comes out of nowhere. There's no explanation. He's very much a literary tool to be like, oh, I need to create a plot for this book. I can't just have two teenagers fawning over each other, being like, oh, I love you, but I want to eat you. Oh, this is bad. It's like, oh, I want to be with you anyways, you know? Like, that's not actually a book, you know? That's just a concept. So she had to have a villain of some kind come in. So James is the most pathetic villain ever. He shows up, he says, hey, I want to eat your girlfriend, and then he tortures her a bit, and it's kind of weird, and you're like, what's going on? And then he dies. Very quickly and off screen. James is, like I said, I love my psychotic vampires, so he's not like, he's still very one-dimensional as a character, but he's a vampire. Like, the mind games he plays with Edward, it's insane. Like, Edward, you know, he's like Hamlet in a way. I almost want to say he's always struggling with like making a decision and committing to something. He's overanalyzing, overthinking everything. So he's like freaking out while he's trying to hunt James and trying to make James hunt him. He's like doing this little mind game battle thing, and it's insane to read. And like the car chase that happens, like Stephenie Meyers, I don't know how she got this idea. I don't know where it come from, but it was brilliant. Who would have thought that Fast and Furious and vampires belong together? Like, they're stealing cars and running away from the police, and it is so crazy and awesome, and it's like the best thing ever. And I'm sitting there reading, and I'm like half this book, I'm gonna be honest, I struggled through because, you know, it was a lot of stalking. But this climax part, I was eating it up. I was just like, like, what's going on? Like, I already knew how the story ended because I read this book like 2 times before, but apparently I didn't know because I was freaking out, being like, get to her, Twilight, get to her, Twilight. You know, I was freaking out. I was going insane. And yeah, it was crazy. I was crazy too. And, but back, what was I saying? Before I got gushed about the climax. But anyways, Stephenie Meyers is a great writer, and she knows how to write climaxes, because that was crazy and I loved it. Thank you. Fast and Furious Vampires. Let's see it, okay? As soon as movie theaters open up, I want someone on this. Vin Diesel, you listening? You listening? Turn into a vampire, please. Oh man, my book's getting all messed up from standing up. That whole last scene where Bella is like, oh, you're a real vampire, and like Edward's sitting there being like, I have to leave her. And it's so crazy to me because, like I said, Edward feels a lot like Hamlet as a character because he can't make a decision, and it's just gonna end in tragedy almost because he can't make a decision, which is crazy because in the original series when Bella turns into a vampire, that's when it gets good and you're like, yes, this is it. And like the last line is like, yes, we have each other forever, like this is beautiful, you know, kind of thing. But like the way this book ended, it makes me rethink that feeling and the tone of that feeling of like, yes, we're together forever now. It's like, oh no. I failed. She's a vampire now. Like the moment when he's sucking her blood, like, you know, in every story, there's like something at the beginning. There's a problem and it needs to be solved. And in Twilight, the problem in Twilight is, oh, how do I get Edward to like me back? You know, how do I understand who he is and like me back? Because, you know, it's Twilight. But in this book, the problem is, how do I taste her blood? And the problem is solved by the end of the book. He tastes her blood, and the way he describes his physical reaction to it and like how it feels like a release reading it. You feel like, finally. And it, like, then you're like, wait, what? Why finally? You know, this isn't the moment. The moment should be, oh, we're in love, and who cares what happens in the future? We'll get through this. No, the moment of release is, I'm finally sucking her blood. It makes sense now why he hates the idea of her being a vampire. Crazy to me. And that's why I don't want to label Midnight Sun as a romance. I want to label it as a tragedy. I almost want to label it as like a horror. Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, that's why I like this book, because it's a horror. And like, I don't know much about horror. I just recently started getting into the genre of horror, and I'll be honest, I've only seen maybe 1 or 2 good horror movies, and the rest that I've watched have been like The Walking Dead. Oh my gosh, this is gonna sound totally insane. As I was reading this book, I was really thinking about how creatures on planet Earth, so I was watching Planet Earth a couple of days ago, so you can see where my train of thought has been going, reading this while watching the documentary Planet Earth. But you know, animals do everything out of instinct. It's how they survive. And they're not self-aware, so they never ask themselves, why am I doing this? Why do I want to breed with this particular bird? Why am I risking my life to get fish for a bird? I watched a lot of penguin documentaries. Super cool. Penguins are so crazy. They're honestly insane. They choose the worst places to live and then they make it work somehow, and it's very inspiring. But yeah, they never ask themselves, why am I doing this? Because they're not self-aware. They know what they have to do. It's built in. It's instinct. It's adaptation. It's evolution, you know. Change, adapt, you know, kind of thing. While as humans, we're so weird because we are self-aware and we do understand right from wrong. And so when we want to act in instinct, and you know, when we want to do something that maybe isn't socially acceptable because for some reason our bodies are out of whack, or because of the way we were brought up, our mentality is all messed up, because you know, evolution, adaptation, you do what you can to survive, you know? And I'm not saying this is like, this condones bad things. I'm just saying that, you know, if we were an animal, we wouldn't sit around asking ourselves, oh, is this wrong? Is this wrong? We should change this policy. We should change how we do this. Because, you know, human nature is human nature. And, but like, I feel like this book in particular really explores wrestling with that, wrestling with our instincts, and trying to fight our instincts, because we do know that some of the things we instinctually want to do aren't good for us, and they're not a good thing or the right way to do things. And it's so interesting to me how it explores this idea of like, because vampires, you know, they like, these vampires in this book, they think faster, you know, they're like the ultimate hunter, you know, but they're still very instinctual, and you know, they rely so heavily on scent. Like, it feels like you're inside the mind of like a PhD and a feral dog. So stay with me now. This is where, you know, the conspiracy theory comes out, and it's a little weird. I feel like literature is so awesome because in literature you can go where you can't go in real life, and you can explore what you can't explore in real life. Either because we can't actually fly, we can't actually live forever, you know, dragons and unicorns aren't real, unfortunately. You know, Santa Claus is a myth, you know, all this stuff. Like, real life is very mundane, and there are societal limitations that don't let us explore the places that our minds kind of want to explore. And I'm not saying that I'm like a psychotic person who wants to kill people, but like, there's a reason why murder mysteries exist, and there's a reason why there's documentaries about serial killers and stuff like that. Like, people want to understand this kind of dark side of themselves and reconcile with it, and it's hard to do that when you live in society that kind of frowns on that stuff. And honestly, you as a person don't want to actually become dark, you just want to understand the dark. You know. And so literature is so great because it can take these concepts and just go 110 million% with it, and it can really turn it on its head and just wring it inside out in a way that you can't just do naturally. And so I feel like Edward as a character really embodies the dichotomy between, you know, the super structure, rigid, we are not animals, we like almost like machines, I want to say. It's kind of hard to describe. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like ultra manners, just like completely putting off being a human that makes mistakes. And then Edward also, you know, like he embodies the this is really hard to say. It's easy in my head to think, but it's hard to say. But like, he embodies the dichotomy between that kind of character and the character of, I just want to rip and tear and scream, you know, and I just want to destroy, and I just want to, you know, let the chips fall where they may. When I started out reading this book, and my brother asked me what I thought of it so far, I told him it was kind of like reading a book about an addict falling in love with his heroine, you know? Like, there's that joke about how cringy that line is when Edward, and how unhealthy it is when Edward describes his feelings towards Bella, and like describing that her blood is like his own personal brand of heroin, of drugs, of alcohol, you know, his preferred tastes and stuff, and why it's such a struggle. But it's very true, you know, as someone who has struggled with addiction before, I totally get it. It's weird. The way he struggles with it, it's like an addict struggling. And that release at the end when he finally drinks her blood, that's why I feel like this book is a tragedy, why it's a horror, because that's not good. That's not what we want. And like, what we want is to be stopped before we make these terrible decisions that our instincts, that our messed up, crazy brains are telling us to do. And just the fact that Edward's character is pulled in such extremes of like intense feral animal and intense hyper controlling creature, you know, and like the fight between these two, it's very therapeutic in a way. I feel insane. It's therapeutic in a way to read about, because it's like, I get it. Wow. And it doesn't feel romantic at all. It feels very, very tragic, and I am super reading more into this than Stephenie Meyer's probably wanted me to, you know, because I'll be honest with you, even when I liked Twilight, when I heard the idea for this book, you know, Twilight from the perspective of Edward, it felt like such a gimmick. It felt like such an easy cash grab. And I'm sure that's how a lot of people are talking about this book. It's like, oh, this woman has written this book already, like 2 other times, and she's doing it again. You know, like, wow, okay. But, you know, power to her for getting money, because power to her for selling 1 million copies, because this book deserves it. I love this book. I said it. There it is. I enjoyed it far more than I thought I would, and it is an excellent horror, in my opinion. Now, it is light horror, I will say that, but it is horror nonetheless, and no one can convince me otherwise. I'm sure Barnes & Noble has it labeled under romance, and that's fine, whatever, but I think that adds to the horror of everything, because how much more horrific is it that we aren't self-aware of our fantasies and how bad they are? And I think that's the boom, that's the mic drop moment of everything. Is because in Twilight, it's a fantasy, it's an escape. And in this book, it's waking you up. And oh my gosh, Stephenie Meyers, you did it again, my girl. You did it again. You woke me up. It's insane to me. Oh my gosh. So, in conclusion, is Edward the perfect boyfriend? Heck to the no. If you meet an Edward in your life, run the other direction as much as you can. Oh yeah, the climax is very fast paced. It's very like boom, 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 boom. But the moment Edward sinks his teeth into Bella and starts drinking, it just slows down and it revels in it. His whole body is just like, you know? And that's what makes it horrific, because of all the things in the world to make a person go, what's making him go ha is almost killing his girlfriend to suck her blood. This is a great book. And maybe it's great for all the wrong reasons. Maybe I misunderstood the text, and maybe I should be upset that that's the message the book brings. But I think it's great when literature can be like, hey, this is what's going on. Like, I don't want to be that person, but I'm going to be that person for a second. I recently took a creative writing class in college, and we covered, like, the general basis, like, just skimming the highlights of all types of mediums when it comes to creative writing. In this textbook, I can't remember the name of the book, oh my gosh, but it was really good. But, all the sections talking about, like, screenplays and short stories and long narratives and yada, yada, yada kind of thing. Every single one had points about what to avoid and what to really focus on in writing. And the biggest one, and it was the biggest one because every single category had it, was ambiguity. You know, it talked a lot about being careful with the themes that you're going to write about, because you don't want to be, because, you know, a lot of people read books to escape. It's an escape. It's a release, it's, you know, you're there to relax, not to be lectured to. If you find yourself writing a character saying, yes, friendship really is magic, you know, you started to hit into that roadblock of now you're preaching a message to someone and it's very clear what you're trying to do. You know, humans are really funny. They want their stories to be full of messages and themes, but they don't want it to seem like they're being told those messages and themes. They want to pretend that they're discovering themselves. And the art of creative writing is really all about trying to create tools in that effect so it feels like you aren't telling them what your theme is. And you know, a lot of people were upset about Twilight because, you know, there wasn't a moment where there wasn't like a disclaimer at the beginning of the book being like, hey, by the way, this is not how you should do this, you know? Or like, hey, by the way, stalking is bad. Or like, hey, by the way, you shouldn't fall in love with someone who wants to be overprotective and controlling about every little thing you do. It doesn't do that, because that's not good writing. And it drives me crazy how careful everyone has to be nowadays, and how they're so worried about every little thing affecting us. Like, it's crazy to hear this argument from people being like, oh, video games don't create violence. In the same breath they say, oh, we shouldn't feature toxic relationships and romance because people are gonna take that as fact. It's like, this is the same thing. Like, let people decide for themselves and have a mind and use their brains to analyze what the book is actually saying about what it's saying. In Twilight, it's saying that you can love someone and you can work through any problem, I guess. I don't know. It's been a while. Maybe I need to reread it. I kind of don't want to reread Twilight because this was exhausting to get through. I've read the same story like too many times and I'm getting over it. But, you know, this book, it would cheapen the experience if at the beginning it said, by the way, falling in love with a vampire is not a good thing to do. It would suck. But like, it feels like because of the way that the world is moving nowadays, we're not allowing literature to speak for itself. We're not allowing our brains to think for themselves when we read this stuff and we analyze the messages in these books. You know, first and foremost, these books, these commercially written books, are here to entertain us. So when you come at me with arguments of being like, oh, this is going to promote toxic relationships and this is going to teach people to be, you know, stalkers and to be like terrible and that it's okay, like, man, there was one point where I would agree with you because I was starting to realize the stuff I was consuming was really bad for me. But like, honestly, I don't feel that way anymore. Like, maybe for younger kids, yeah, that's a terrible thing because it's hard for them to realize, but I was that kid. I read Twilight and I turned out just fine. I don't think stalking's okay. I don't think obsessing over someone and letting it control your whole life is okay. I know I've learned that that's not okay, and that's not how you should do things, and that's not real. And I think that we shouldn't stifle art just because we're worried that people are gonna think it's real. You know, satire is dying because of this. Like, real good horror is dying because of this. And I think this book is a perfect example. I think we should be careful when we're trying to be woke about everything that we say and do and consume, because we're being too careful, and so we don't have any place to explore this crap. Like, the reason this is a book and not real life is because in real life people get hurt and people get traumatized and people, like, whatever. But these are just characters. This is just a book, so it's okay to explore themes that maybe we shouldn't explore. And yeah, I'll be the first to say we should be careful when it comes to like content for like kids and teenagers, because it does have real world effects. But I don't think that we should sit here and say that these kinds of stories shouldn't exist just because we think it's going to be hurting our psyche. Okay? I think that is a person by person basis, and we shouldn't be too one side or the other about what we censor and what we don't censor. I think it depends on the person and the situation they're in. And personally, for me, I'm not gonna censor myself when it comes to this book, because I know right from wrong. And I understand what this book is trying to tell me, even if Stephenie Meyers wasn't actually trying to tell me anything. Like, that's to me, that's good writing, is when you can analyze it and you can, like, every time you go back to it, you just discover more and more and more and more, you know, because the ambiguity of it isn't saying, you know, oh, this is right or this is wrong. You know, it's saying, well, what do you think it is? You know, it doesn't treat me like a child, and I appreciate that. So yeah, at the end of the day, Midnight Sun's a good book. And I'm want to give out a congratulations to Stephenie Meyers. You did it. You defeated the dragon. You wrote the book. And I've heard interviews that she's been thinking of writing other stories that take place in this world, and I personally will be there for it, whatever it will be. And I hope she explores more of these themes that, you know, I feel like a lot of literature today either don't talk about or like, yeah, they don't talk about it, because if they admitted that this stuff is super weird and whatever, then, oh my gosh, like, yeah, this is a good book. And you should definitely give it a shot, especially if you hate Twilight. If you hate Twilight, I'm not gonna say you'll love this book, but I think you'll understand if you read this why you probably really shouldn't hate Twilight. But yeah, that's it for me. Did I congratulate Stephenie Meyers yet? Okay, yeah. Yeah, 15 years and she did it. She did it. Gosh. Insane. Like, honestly, finishing this book, as creepy as the ending came off to me, it also felt like, you know, it felt like a standing ovation, like, Stephenie Meyers, you did it. And she really, you know, she could have cashed it in. She could have, you know, done the gimmick thing. And, like some other people that I won't go into. But, but she didn't. She delivered, and she delivered hard. And, you know, as I was reading this book, I was thinking to myself, if this was what I got instead of Twilight all those years ago, would I still have been a fan of the series? And I think, honestly, as a kid, the answer would have been no. And that answer doesn't bother me, because I think that's a good thing. Midnight Sun, what a ride. Woo! I'm done. This took me like half the day to film. What time is it? I feel like I was talking really fast, so if you don't understand, whatever. But yeah, she dedicated this book to her fans, and that was really sweet. If any book in Twilight I wanted to be dedicated to me, it would be this one for sure. Just when I thought, you know, just when I thought I was over this series, it comes back to haunt me, so you do what you do. And yeah, she even did this thing where you write your name in at the end for the acknowledgements, so I wrote my name. It's so cheesy and corny. Oh man. Dark fantasy, dude. It's my favorite thing. Gosh. Anyways, here's the finished product of the painting I did of Edward, if I did it. I don't know. I haven't decided yet, but I will after filming this and editing it if I did. So that's what I'm gonna do. And yeah, check me out on all my plugins. Always be plugging. There'll be links, I guess, if I bother. I probably won't. But yeah, I'll link the book to you. I'll link other stuff to you, I guess. Whatever. Anyways, stay cozy, stay safe, please wear a mask, please wear a mask, please wear a mask, and yeah. I'm dead inside. Okay. That's it, I'm done. It was exhausting to do. It's an exhausting book.